In this episode, we will be finishing the walls on our son Kyle's HYPERADOBE off-the-grid tiny house. We will also be attaching the top rail and getting everything level and ready for the roof.
Welcome to our channel. We are Red and April off-grid. So in 2020, we purchased 40 acres of off-grid land, subdivided off parcels for our grown kids, drilled a shared well, built a barn, solar, and our own home. Now that we are done with our builds, we are helping our son finish his HYPERADOBE home.
We set up an optical transit level to get some elevation readings on the wall, and I had to set it up on some scaffolding in order to get high enough to take those elevation readings on the wall. Kyle is standing on a wall with a measuring stick, and I'm looking through the optics and calling out the number that I see in the crosshairs. We set a 0 point at one of the corners and then took measurements every 6 feet or so around the perimeter and spray painted on how far we were away from that 0 point as we went around. With the measurements taken, we're ready to get back to building the wall again. I've been helping Kyle for a few days now and we have a good system going. I've been working in the dirt pit. I'm preparing the soil, filling up the buckets, and then bringing them over to Kyle. He's up on top of the wall, putting the dirt into the chute and filling up the bags and compressing it and shaping it as he goes along. We're using 6 buckets total, so 2 sets of 3, mostly because 3 buckets can fit pretty easily in our wheelbarrow. And so I take 3 buckets, go down, fill them up, and then bring them back up full, and then we swap them out. Our grand dog has been enjoying the process too. She loves to chase balls and she loves having us out here so she can play with us and be around us. We are closing in on finish height for this wall, and that's why we had the transit level out earlier. We wanted to get readings on elevation at different points all the way around the wall and record the low spots and the high spots so that we can make some adjustments as we do these final layers. The readings we got from the transit level were interesting. We were both a little surprised to discover how close in elevation the wall was all the way around. We didn't know how much it would drift as he built this wall. This is the first time since we did the foundation that we've put a transit level on it and actually taken measurements of the elevation. So he's done all this by eye as he's gone up, and it's remarkably close. We found that at the worst spot we were about 5 inches low, and so we decided to add another bag in that area, which worked out pretty good since each bag is about 4 inches high. This will be the last course on this side of the house, and it won't go all the way across. It'll go almost all the way across, and we'll taper it at the end in order to get this side level. The finish height for this wall is 8 feet, and this is the low side of our single slope roof. We will be building up the other side of the house an additional 16 inches so that we have 16 inches of drop from one side of the house to the other. That works out to 4 additional courses. And here's a better look at what Kyle's doing up on the wall. Remember, he's working at 8 foot high, so we have the scaffolding set about 4 feet. I lift the dirt up to him to the scaffolding, and then he lifts them up and is able to set them on the wall, and then he's able to dump them directly into his chute and fill up the bags. It's interesting to note that he's able to do all his work right on top of the bag that he's just filled, or this course that he is just minutes before filled. He's able to walk on it, set the buckets on it. So basically, this dirt sets up really fast, and a lot of that's due to the moisture content in the dirt. If you get the moisture content right, it packs down, and then you can immediately walk on it and work on it. You don't have to wait for it to dry. If the soil is too dry, it won't compact properly, and it'll actually fall out of the pores of the bag or kind of sift through, which you don't want. And if it's too wet, it'll be muddy, and it'll kind of squish out of the holes of the bag, and it'll be too soft to work on. We found that getting that moisture content just right, just wet enough that it packs really good, but then you can immediately walk on it. That's kind of the magic spot. And a little better look at the work that I'm doing in the pit over there. I'm spraying down the soil first. I'm trying to pull the dirt down from the sides. We don't want to dig this pit any deeper because it's already fairly deep and a little bit difficult to get out of. And so we just want to make it wider. And so I'm using a spray hose to wet down the sides, and then I'm pulling it down and kind of mixing it all together. And here's a look at Kyle doing the last few feet of this last course on this south side wall. He's trying to taper in this last little bit, and he's able to do that by just kind of compacting it in, and he's able to taper it down to 1.5 inches or so at the small point, and get the wall as level as possible on that side. Well, it's very exciting to have the last full course complete. Now we just have to build up the high side of the house. When Kyle finishes a course, he cuts off the bag and either tucks in the excess material underneath that bag or ties it off with baling wire. Well, since we're done for the day, we're going to go ahead and take everything down off the wall. We don't want to leave it up there overnight or until the next day. Sometimes the winds will get high enough that it'll actually blow the dolly off of the wall. And so we're finished up today. We'll start on the other side of the wall tomorrow. Kyle's going to stay on the wall a little bit longer. He has an opportunity before it completely sets to make some fine adjustments. He's going to take out any high spots and just try to get it as level as possible before he walks away from it and it dries completely. Here we are back at it the next morning. We're starting on the side wall. We're going to be adding 4 more courses to build up the north wall to the proper height. And Kyle is going to try to taper in the bags when he starts a bag and when he ends a bag on these side walls so that these side walls taper up. And so as he does each course, the first 3 or 4 feet of the course is going to be tapered, so that when we're done with these 4 courses, the northern wall will be 16 inches higher than the southern wall that we just finished, and both of these side walls, which are the east and west walls, will be tapered evenly from the low side to the high side. When deciding on the size to build the home, Kyle wanted to build something that was big enough for his needs, but not a lot extra. And so he's coming at this from kind of a minimal perspective. This approach will minimize the already high amount of labor that the home will require and minimize his costs. The size he settled on was an exterior footprint of about 30.5 feet long by 15.5 feet wide. That leaves him with a space that is tiny by conventional standards, but he really feels like it'll be more than enough to meet his needs. As it is, Kyle calculated that it would take about 50 tons of dirt to build the walls on this house. That's a lot of dirt to move and a lot of thermal mass. I might mention this is a really nice time of year to be doing this type of work. It's really hard physical labor, and we're limiting our work sessions to about 1.5 hours, 2 hours at a time because it is so physically demanding. But the nice seasonable temperatures that we're experiencing here are really helpful. It's late winter now, and the daytime highs are low 60s, and it's just perfect working weather. Of course, Kyle has been working on this for the last year, and so he's experienced it through all 4 seasons, through the blazing heat of summer when he mostly worked either early in the morning or late in the afternoon, all through the monsoon season, which was very wet, but none of that stopped him, and he was definitely persistent and kept at it. But there were days or sometimes even weeks where he had to stop because the weather was so bad, but then he just picked it up again and kept going. We're about to finish up for this work session here, and we've made about 30 feet of progress in this 2-hour work session. And here we are back at it again. April has skipped a day of recording, but we finished that course that we were working on, and we're starting on the next. Kyle is starting this new course by tapering it in, and he's trying to taper it in over the course of about 4 foot, and since the bag is about 4 inches tall, that works out to about 1 inch of rise over a foot of run. Here you can get a good look at him working on one of these radius corners. He just follows the radius around, does it all by hand and eyeball. He gets off occasionally and takes a look at it, puts a level on the side to make sure he's maintaining consistency as he goes up. He chose to do radius corners instead of buttressing because they're a lot easier and because it just seemed like a really sturdy way to go with these HYPERADOBE bags. Using other bagged earth systems, it might not be as stable, but with these long tube bags, you get a nice consistent radius around there without ever breaking or separating the bag, and it seems very stable. Also, the 18-inch bag width makes everything more stable. A challenging part of this job is lifting these heavy buckets. They're 5-gallon buckets, and we fill them about 3/4 full of soil, and the soil has been wet, so it's extra heavy. And so it's pretty difficult to lift these buckets up. Kyle has experienced some trouble with his shoulders and back, and so he's had to learn how to be extra careful with these heavy lifting operations, and he's had to learn how to do it safely and in a way that minimizes the stress on his joints. He's learned to bend his knees and use his legs as much as he can in the lifting operations to help his back, and for the shoulders, the thing that helped most was keeping the elbows tucked in close to the body when he's lifting. Once he's done all the lifting and the dirt is in the chute, he's learned how to kind of rock the dolly back and forth and move it along. Then the next physical operation is to pack the earth down, and you can see him really slamming it down with that tamper. He puts quite a bit of force into the tamping operation in order to really compact the soil well, and it's compacted so well that he can immediately walk on it, so he's packing it down pretty hard. The method that Kyle uses to do this is something that he's developed himself, since he had to figure out a way to do this all by himself, since he's done most of this project without any help. It's difficult to move scaffolding around by yourself, and so in order to minimize that, he's developed this technique where he's able to walk on the wall on the just finished course and push the dolly along in front of him. Most people do it the other way around. They're behind the dolly working on an already finished course. But he stands on the opposite side of the dolly as normal, and this has really allowed him to work on top of the wall and to minimize the amount of scaffolding he has to use, and it's turned out to be a really efficient way to do it. Especially for someone working solo, it does require that you do your work on top of the wall, which is a little more dangerous than working off of scaffolding, but the 18-inch bag gives you a wide surface and makes it a little safer. And here we are, tying off the very last bag on the very last course. We are finishing up the HYPERADOBE walls on this house. Very exciting. It's been a pleasure to help Kyle finish up these walls. I've only been helping for the last week and a half or so, working a couple hours a day, so I don't feel like I've done much, but it was a good time to be here helping since the walls are getting really high. It's good to have some help getting the dirt up to that height, and it's a little safer to have somebody else around. So it was a good time to come up and help, but really he's done the lion's share of the work here. He's been working on this solo for the last year or so. And I know he's super excited. It's kind of surreal for him to finally have this step done. With the walls done, we're moving scaffolding in place and getting ready to move on to the next big part of the project, which is the roof. In order to do that, we need to put down the top rail, which will serve as a transition between the walls and the roof. This is really an interesting and important part of the project, and it's something that we had to put a lot of thought into. We didn't find just a ton of guidance out there on how to do this, so we had to figure it out for ourselves. You know, it's a really interesting problem. How to attach a roof that's flat and plain and made out of conventional wood and metal materials to a organic earthen structure that's kind of lumpy and not perfectly level. That was an interesting problem. Another difficulty that presents itself and that we had to think our way through is how to handle the radius corners. We're going to be putting on a rectangular roof onto a house that is generally rectangular, but with these radius corners, and so how do you match those two up? So, you know, between the uneven surface and then the radius corners, we had to come up with a way to make a really secure attachment to the roof. We ended up deciding to make a top rail that will be 6 inches wide and 2 2x6s thick that will go around the radius of the top of the walls. We will cut in 45s at the corners to generally follow the radius. And Kyle doesn't have a lot of experience with carpentry type work, so he's letting me take the lead on this part of the project. And here I am prepping the boards for the first layer of the top rail. I'm using treated lumber here. We want the lumber that makes contact with the bags to be treated so that it's rot resistant. The second layer will be untreated lumber. I'm using a Craig jig to pre-drill the holes at the ends of the board so that I can attach these boards end to end and just make a line of them all the way around the circumference of these walls, like say cutting in 45s at the corners, trying to follow that radius the best I can. Once I get that done, I'll do some leveling to get that as level as possible. Kyle's up on the wall to help me do the leveling here. These walls are a little more dangerous now. It's a little tricky walking on the top of them now that the sill plate is kind of in the middle of the wall. Makes it a little bit difficult to maintain your footing. We're having to be really careful here. At this point, the sill plate is not attached to the wall in any way. It's just sitting on top of the wall, roughly in the middle of the bag all the way around. We started by finding the high point on the north and south wall and going along with the level and bringing everything else up by shimming until it was level with that high point, top and bottom for the high and low walls. And then we also used shims to straighten up these side walls. Basically, we just wanted to create a straight line between the high and low walls on the side walls. So just made sure that that was straight. This was definitely a tricky process. Definitely spent quite a bit of time on this, going back and forth, figuring out where we needed to shim things. You're trying to do the least shimming as possible. You want to bring the rest of the wall up to the already highest point. So we found the highest point on the bags, which is our limitation, and then brought all of the low points up to that. And so you're just trying to minimize the amount of shimming that you have to do. It ended up being a very reasonable amount of shimming. I think maybe 1.5 inches was the most we had to shim, which on an earthen wall like this I thought was very good. We did have a few gaps on the side walls that were a little bigger than that, just because it was a little challenging to taper the bags perfectly, as we're starting and stopping those courses, but overall it was quite good. With a little bit of work and shims, we were able to get it quite acceptably level. Remember, at this point, it's not attached to the wall in any way. It's just kind of floating on the top, but it is even now that we've shimmed it up, and we're ready to put on the next layer of wood, which will be an untreated 2x6. And April didn't get any footage of it, but we did get the second layer of wood on the top plate here. We did make sure to overlap all of the joints. It's very important that you overlap the joints so that when you screw these two pieces of wood together, you get a lot more strength and rigidity overall. Once that was done, we were ready to do the final leveling before we actually attach it to the wall. We're using a string level to do the final leveling, and this particular part of the project was interesting. We had to figure out how to make sure that the side wall was straight and plane with the rest of the roof, and it's difficult because it's 45'd in. We ended up screwing in 2 boards on either side to create outriggers that stick out over the side of the wall past those 45s, and then we were able to attach a string to the bottom of that board and then tell if that sidewall board was level with the rest of it. Everything was pretty good along the top and bottom wall, the high and low wall, but these side walls needed a little bit of extra work, and these outriggers with that line allowed us to get them spot on, but we did have to shim them up about 1 inch on each side. One last check and we're satisfied with it. I think we're level on the top and bottom walls and plane overall, so we are ready to attach the top rail to the walls. We'll be attaching the top rail and thereby the roof to the wall through various means, the first of which is through rebar stakes. We'll be placing 2-foot-long rebar stakes every 4 feet along the perimeter of the wall. We drilled a hole through both layers of the wood and down into the dirt of the bag, and then pounded a rebar stake down in. We also had the top part of it bent over so that it can't pull out. With the top plate level and staked, we are ready to grout it in. We will be using concrete to do this. We will be mixing it ourselves and using a 1-2-3 mix, which is a high-strength mixture. We decided to start off just mixing small batches in buckets and see how that works at first here. So we've mixed up a small batch. We wanted to make it pretty thick so that when we pack it underneath the top rail, it doesn't want to ooze out. The gap here on the sides is the biggest gap. It's much better along the front and the back, so we decided to start here where we had the large gap and see how this grout mix worked. We have seen other people use cob for this step, which is a mud and straw mixture, but I really wanted something that was stronger, and cement is super strong. Using this 1-2-3 mixture, we should have a strength of about 5,000 psi compression strength in this concrete, so it'll work really well. It'll definitely bear the weight of the roof and be super strong and sturdy, and I won't be worried about it cracking out over time. Well, this is working pretty well. This dry mix is holding together well. It doesn't have a lot of slump, so it's staying where we put it, and we like how that's working out. It's taking quite a bit of material, a little more than we expected, especially since there's bigger gaps on the sides, but I think this is going to work out well. Here you can get a look at the top rail as it goes around the circumference of the walls. It makes a nice flat plane surface that'll be perfect for the roof. After mixing up a few batches in the bucket, we decided that it'd be more efficient to go ahead and bring up the concrete mixer to finish the rest of the job. The next day we were ready to finish the job, this time with the concrete mixer to help us along. This was really nice. We were able to mix up much larger batches, enough to provide a few kind of half buckets full and allow us to work much longer without mixing. One important thing I will mention here is the gravel component of this concrete. We used a very fine gravel, very small gravel for this, and that's really important so that you can pack it in underneath the sill really well and get into small gaps. If you used bigger gravel, you wouldn't be able to pack it in, so we used really fine gravel for this. Once we got a system going, this went along pretty fast. We were able to do the work off of scaffolding, just kind of working side by side there. And we're making really good progress. We just dump some of the material out on the side and work it in by hand. Really important here to use a good quality plastic glove to protect your hands from the concrete. But it was definitely something that, we really didn't need any other tools for. Just the hands were the best tool for this, as we're squishing it under and shaping the sides down to a nice taper on either side. It's really exciting to get this grout in place. It really locks in the top rail, connects it mechanically to the bag. The concrete forms to the top of the bag and then to the underneath of the plate and fills that space in between them perfectly, to where once this dries, that top plate will be as level as I could get it, and it will not move. It'll be really well attached and inflexible. And the next step will be to attach the top plate again to the bags using straps. Earlier in the process, when the walls were a few feet lower, Kyle put in straps and just left them hanging loose as he built the wall, so that when we get to this step of the process and we have a sill plate that is on and grouted in and staked down, we can further strengthen that attachment to the walls by looping those straps over the top rail and connecting them with the straps. So that's just another form of attachment to the wall. Meanwhile, we're just about finished up with the grout here. We will leave it for a few days to dry, and Kyle will wet it down periodically.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed our video, be sure to give us a thumbs up and join us again next time.